All right. Hi, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. It's very good to see all of your smiling faces, faces that I know, faces that I don't know, faces that I've known for quite some time. It's a beautiful thing whenever Klal Yisrael gets together and we learn and we listen and we speak about our experiences in life. So before I get started, I have to give my kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who has guarded my steps in everywhere in life and throughout this wild adventure of someone recognizing what's missing in their life and wanting to obtain it. All of those steps led me to be at this moment, at this time, and speaking to you all. So I wouldn't have other way. So I'm very, very honored and very humbled to be here. Also, kavod to our beloved Rabbi Asher Vaknin and to his families in Eretz Israel right now. And it's my prayer and hopefully all of yours that he returns in peace, that he returns quickly, and B'ezrat Hashem that he, has an extra sheet from Mashiach on the plane to come back with him as well. So we're gonna jump right into it. We're getting ready to go into Pesach. It's a very, auspicious is the right word, very important time for the Jewish people because we come out of Mitzrayim, we become a nation. Around this time when I was a little kid, I would always take a trip with my mother to go see my uncle Carter, Shalom, may he rest in peace, and my aunt Barbara. They live in North Carolina. It's a very, very nice house. And always around this time, for those of us that are old enough to remember, ABC, the American Broadcasting Network, would show the film The Ten Commandments with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. They would show it every year around this time. I remember one year they didn't show it, and they showed, an episode of like Desperate Housewives. I wrote ABC a very nasty letter about how upset I was, and I don't even think they got it, but it was on next year. So I can remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting there, I'm in the living room, there's this massive TV, my mother's to my left, my sister's to my right, and I'm watching the majesty just unfold. I mean, they don't make movies like they used to. So there's Charlton Heston, and he's Moses. He's doing it. He's giving it to Pharaoh and to just carrying the whole performance. Amazing, amazing. So that actually is the second time I met, so to speak, Moshe Rabbeinu. I've always known about him because growing up in the Christian church, to a certain extent, we hold they hold the Old Testament into a regard as something to be learned from, but not something to be adhered to, because there's another something that they sold to that book, and they decided, you know what, this is what we're going to go with, because this is just fine for us. So anyway, I met it, I knew it, I understood it, and I started to ask some questions. And those questions started in the house. Because every Sunday, we'd have to get dressed and go to church and, go through the motions, and I'd have to hear about this guy whom I've never met, but I was supposed to give him my everything. I was supposed to give everything to him. It's like somebody saying, hey, I know you don't know who I am. You guys remember those Nigerian prince emails that used to come around, that whole scam of, oh, I'm this prince, I got access to X amount of billions of dollars, I just need you to do me a solid. Give me your routing number and your account number, give me a little bit of money, and when I get my billions, I'll break you off a piece, right? We were all familiar with what took place, right? That's the same concept that we have with this person who shan't be named. Everybody know who he is. I don't have to call his name out. But I'm supposed to give everything to this man, and I never met him. My soul, my life, my love, because of something, they said he did for me. But as far as I was concerned, if my salvation was actually mine, and I couldn't do anything about it, I should give it to somebody I do know, like my mother, or my father, or my sister, who were my first teachers. So as I'm asking all of these questions, I got a lot of I don't knows, and also a lot of look it up. I grew up a look it up kid. I had this library in my house to where everything I wanted to know was in that library. Every time I go inside the library, I always find out something new. But it wasn't until I grew up that I noticed on all the door frames of my house, except for the bathroom, there was this little tiny thing on the door frame about the size of my pinky that was aluminum, and it was painted over. And it had this thing on it that looked like a W. And I would ask my mom, I said, who put these there? And also I vividly remember we had a white refrigerator upstairs, and a white stove upstairs, and a yellow refrigerator and yellow stove downstairs. I said, who put these things there? And my mom said, well, the people who lived in this house were Jews. All these things, a couple of them belonged to them, and they left it behind for us to have. My father, God bless him, He was a police officer for about, I think it was about 17 years, and he bought the house that we lived in from a Jewish police chief. His name was Officer Fisher. So we're living in a house that was lived in by Jews, and I see these mezuzot. At the time, I'm also going to school in the suburbs in a community called West Bloomfield with a lot of Jewish people. I go into their house and I see the same thing, but it's in different shapes and different colors. I said, oh, the architect that built your house must have built my house as well. They said, how can you tell? I said, because they leave their marks on all the doorposts except for the bathrooms. So, you know, the architect must have built my house as well. And they said, no, those aren't, you know, signets of the architect. Those are mezuzot because they contain blessings and they do this, do that. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Now at this point, I'm in, I think, about 4th grade. And I stayed in this Jewish community until I went into high school. Around 7th grade was the time when all of my friends were becoming men and women in the community. So of course you had a bat and a bar mitzvah. I remember I went to a service. It was a, let's call it alternative. So the person that was on the beamer was a young lady. Even until like right now, I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember the cadence of how she said it and how I heard it. And my heart just exploded in my chest. I was like, this is the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. I was like, well, I know what she's doing. She's reading from the Torah, and I know that, you know, her parents and her grandparents and everybody, they did the same thing. But where does it all come from, and how did you inherit it? And they said, well, this is something we were born into. I'm a Jew because my father was a Jew and my mother was a Jew, and so on and so forth, going all the way back. So that raised the question to me, how did I become Christian? So I'll tell you guys a little bit about my family. My mother, her heritage comes from Mississippi. My father's heritage comes from Louisiana. My father's from a very tiny pinhole town called Spearsville. Unfortunately, for a majority of African Americans, our family legacy is interrupted by the bitterness and the harshness of slavery, chattel slavery. Now, when it comes to slavery in America, we are actually about 409 miles from where it all began. It began in a place that was called Jamestown, Virginia. And in 1619, 20 Africans who were stolen from the continent of Africa by a Dutch ship were then set upon, by a Spanish ship, were then set upon again by a Spanish ship, kidnapped for a second time, placed on the ship, and then brought to America. So roughly what we can see is upon their arrival, they had to work, right? That work was parceled out pretty much 1 acre per person, because at the time, the Jamestown colonies, for those of us that don't know, they really don't teach us this in history, but the colonization of America, it failed constantly. And the strongest point where it came out was in 1619, when people said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pay people to come to America and to work. And for those that aren't getting paid to work, you're going to have slaves. Fantastic. So there were a lot of issues. The first issue was that a lot of people who were there, they didn't want to work. They didn't want to be there. They said, and it was quoted and written down by John Smith, who was a captain, they said they'd rather die, and they'd rather starve and die than farm. So they got their indentured service to do the work. But also before that, they tried to enslave the native populace. That didn't work because they lived here. So what can we do? We're bringing this wealth of slaves and have them to work. By 1824, there were over 100,000 Africans that were living in what would then be the United States of America. So there was a little bit of a problem. And the problem was that they couldn't be controlled. So what's the best way to control somebody? By their mind and by their heart. So when a person is subject to slavery, chattel slavery, as we all know, we were in the 39th level of Tumah, correct? So how does that work? You have to strip something away from that person. You have to take away their humanity, their spirit. You have to convince them that they do not exist and that their purpose is to do whatever you want them to do. And that's what happened to us here. And that's how we became inheritors of the cross and of Christian doctrine. And it works out perfectly, because if you have a broken family structure to where your life is not yours, it can be taken from you in a whim. You wake up on Monday, you work, you wake up on Tuesday, your father's not there anymore because your father got sold off. But there's a replacement for that. And it's this guy that lived in Israel. And he knows everything about you, and he loves you, and he wants to bring you in. But don't forget, he created you to serve and to be subjugated. And anything that happens to you is the will of God. So what did we do? We accepted it. We carried it on, and we continue it to this very, and we continue that that egregious practice to this very day, not actually knowing where it came from. So it came to me at one point in time where I said, you know what? I don't want to do it anymore, because there's a lot of questions that people aren't answering for me that I can answer for them, and they're supposed to be my religious superiors. So maybe this is not the thing for me. I remember I had a conversation with my father. I told him, I said, you know, how did we become Christians? He said, well, your father is a Christian, your grandfather, so on and so forth. I said, well, was it forced upon us? He said, well, religion's forced on everybody at some point in time. I said, well, no, sir. I said, it's not. I said, because my Jewish friends, it's not forced upon them. I mean, you know, they may not want to, you know, wake up and go to Shachrit, but the fact that they're Jews isn't based out of any persecution whatsoever. It's inherited through their family. I said, so wasn't that the same for us? He said, well, that's something I can't answer. So I found out later. So I decided everyone to find the answer for myself. Around the age of 13, I began working at the world's largest museum of African American history, called the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, which is in Detroit. And I started studying and researching and finding out how exactly we got our spirituality. Now, when you study the history of the so-called continent of Africa, because Africa is really not its name, but I don't want to go into too much details, you find out a lot of things. The continent of Africa is 11,709,000 square miles. In the area that is the so-called Middle East today, Middle East is a geopolitical term. Is it like, well, what is it? Middle East? Middle of what? Is it middle of the Eastern world? If that is the Middle East, then where is the northern south and the southern west and so on and so forth? So the area that was later on called Israel, my friends, is actually attached to the continent of Africa. It's on the same tectonic plate. So that means that the people who come from there are Afro-Asiatic people. But why is that something that's hidden from us? Well, that's because that guy who we talked about earlier that was used as a tool of our physical oppression and mental oppression, if you're using that to oppress people that look like him, how is it going to work? It's not going to work. So you got to make him look like a hipster that lives in Williamsburg, you know, the blue eyes, the blonde hair, you know, all that jazz. You got to make it to where they put his pictures everywhere in their home, to where they live for him, they die for him, and they say, you know what, I love him to death, but I've never met him. So as far as I was concerned, that was enough. Detroit is also home to one of the largest concentrations of Arabs outside of Saudi Arabia. It's in a city called Dearborn. Detroit is also home to an organization called the Nation of Islam, which also has its roots in Chicago. So being 13, not knowing which direction to go, having a good sense of what's what, a lot of people came to me and they said, you know what, you're a young, smart, black brother, you know, you're not Christian, you know what you should be? You should be Muslim. Well, why should I be Muslim? You should be Muslim because your forefathers were Muslim. They were on the plantation calling out the Adhan, and the slave master didn't want to hear it. So in spite of everything that you and your people have been through, that's what you should hold to. So I did. I started practicing Sunni Islam when I was 13 years old. And this coming from a brother named Malcolm X, Shalom. He was a Sunni. He was a Sunni. And so a lot of people during the Civil Rights Movement were following his example. So they said, if Malcolm X is Sunni and he's sticking it to the oppression of black people in America, that means that we should be Sunni. Being Muslim is going to fix our problems. But the way that we inherited Islam was in a far more bitter way than we inherited the cross. The Arab conquest swept across the world, also coming across northern Africa, coming into Western Africa. The only reason that our brothers in Africa today say Salaam alaikum wa alaikum salam is because they were put under the crescent by the sword. And that was it. So once I figured that out, there was still nothing I could do. I was like, well, if I'm not supposed to be Christian, I'm not supposed to be Muslim, and let's not be coy. I was very afraid of going to hell at this point in time. Very afraid of it. So I said, okay, well, what else am I going to do? What else can I do? I know that God exists, and I know that he needs to be served, but how can he be served? So when me going into my family's history, I thought very deeply about my grandfather, a man who I never met, but he had a very, very large impact on my life. The man who raised my grandfather, his father, his life didn't belong to him. That man was a slave in Spearsville, Louisiana. And this is still on my father's side. My father's grandmother would tell these stories about her grandfather, who was actually an indigenous American. I forgot what nation he was from, but he was a war chief. He was kidnapped with his wife, and he was brought to Spearsville as well. And my grandmother said when I was a little girl, I would wake up and I would look out the window and I would hear these noises, the screaming and the shouting and like this crying. And it was my great-grandfather out in the woods singing war songs, running around and swinging a machete about his head, because he never forgot where he came from and he never forgot what his roots were, even though this predicament had brought him into this space and time and into this religious practice. He still kept to his own. So that made me question, wonder, you know, what's mine? What can I have? How can I stay true like my ancestors did? So I did some more digging and some more searching. And I met a man. I didn't meet him actually. Well, I met him through my earbuds. His name was Bob Marley. You guys know that guy? Of course, right? So Bob Marley would speak about, you know, Zion, about peace, about love, and about all of these different, about Moses, about Israel. And I was like, yeah, this is right up my alley. So I got introduced to another faith. That faith is called Rastafarianism. Rastafarianism is the belief that the deposed emperor of Ethiopia, who died in 1974, is actually Mashiach ben Dawid. That's what their belief system is, because we have in the Midrash the story of Shlomo HaMelech and the Queen of Sheba, their son Menelik, and them bringing Kohanim and Levim to Ethiopia, and that being the legend per se as to how Judaism was spread in Ethiopia. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is the way to go. And of course, it was extremely attractive. Why was it attractive? Because every single person in that faith who had power, they looked like me. So I wanted to look like them. So I grew out my beard. I had very long rastot that came like down to like right here. And, you know, I just kept it all. But then still, there was something that was missing, because that guy who shan't be named played a very big part in the faith. And I had abandoned that a while ago, so I was close, but still no cigar. So what do? We keep searching, we keep looking. And by this time, I am 19. I moved out of my house and I moved into my own space. I was living in Detroit, Michigan at the time, and I work in film. And we had this massive grant to where if people wanted to come into Michigan and make movies, they'd get taxes, they'd get money back on the taxes that they would pay. So, you know, there was always work to be done, work to be had. So I said, okay, Detroit's the place I need to be. So what I ended up doing is I moved to Detroit. And as I'm walking through downtown, and unfortunately Detroit has been the place of two major political upheavals. One, I think, happening in 1948, another one in 1960. Or 42, 68. I could be getting the dates wrong, excuse me. So on one period of time, a lot of our downtown areas were like abandoned. There were these big skyscrapers, but nobody in them. And as I'm walking along, I see this building that's surrounded by brick, has these beautiful multicolored windows, and it has these bright red doors, and on the front is a golden Mogen David. So I said, oh, it's a synagogue. But do I just walk in? What do I do? So, you know, wanting to see if it was open, I walked up to the doors, I pulled on the handle, and it opened, and I ran off. I had no idea what I was going to do upon the entrance of me going into the synagogue. I didn't know who was going to meet, what I was going to see. So I remember I was laying in my bed, and I said, you know what? Tomorrow, I'm going to go in there, and I would just tell them, hello, my name is blank. I'm not going to tell you what my original name. I'm going to let you find it on Google. And I want to be a Jew. So I decided to go in and I did that. And I met a gentleman who said, you know what? That's great, but I actually can't help you because I'm not a Rav and I'm not a member of the board and all this other thing. So why don't you come back in a couple days, and the person you want to see, his name is Dawid, and Dawid's going to be here. So I go in. Dawid wasn't there, but I met two ladies, Chava and Liz, and I told them, I said, hi. I said, my name's so-and-so. I'd like to be a Jew. And they said, Kol hakavod, have a seat. Have some food, have some tea, chill out. So I waited till service was over and I met David, and David said, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to come back every single day. You should be here every day, and we'll get you started. And it wasn't until, I'd have to say probably about 2 years ago, Chava actually told me the first time that I met David said to her in complete confidence, you know, a lot of young brothers that come into the synagogue and very few of them actually come back. And she said, you know what, I think there's something special about this one. He might come back. He might come back. We'll see. Now, actually, totally missed. Before I ended up moving to Detroit, my father decided no longer to be a police officer, but be a different type of public servant. He decided to run for mayor, and he won the election. And so it's the job of the, you know, first family, and that always made me, you know, shudder. I didn't understand why I was first just because of who my father was. I felt like if anything we should be last because we're public servants. But anyway, it was our job to go around to different religious organizations. So I would have to visit at least 3 churches on a Sunday. And we'd have to eat and sit, and I would go and hear all these different ideas about God and about who God was. And even though they were Christian, none of their ideologies actually met up. So I'm like, you know, this is furthering the not just the idea, but the notion that maybe what I and what we're doing is not right. One day, my mother and I were driving, and we saw this really big, beautiful, colorful building, and all these little golden idols on top of it. I told my mom, I said, oh, that's a Hindu temple. Let's go check it out. We haven't been there yet. We haven't said hello to them. So we went inside, and we were met by their, I guess he's like their Kohen Gadol, their Swami, and he says to me, he says, you know what? I know that your birthday's coming up, so I want you and your sister to come back and to have a reading, because they have this this belief system that everybody is a gilgul of someone or something. So they're like, we want to see what your gilgul is. So why don't you come back and, you know, spend some time with us? So I said, okay. So I came back, and oh my goodness, this guy's sitting there. He's speaking in Hindi, and he reads off of these banana leaves. And so he couldn't really speak English that well, but his daughter told us. She said the angel Gabriel comes to him and speaks to him in his ear and writes for him on these banana leaves. And the moment after he comes out of his trance, he forgets everything. So he has to tell you what he needs to tell you within that time frame, or otherwise it's just going to be lost forever. So as I'm sitting there listening to this man and looking at him, you know, chewing his stuff, and it's going speed of light, right? So I'm just sitting there. And they told my mother, they said, Mrs. Payne, they said, your son is the oldest person in the house. He's been reincarnated twice, and this is his 3rd time coming back because there's something that he needs to do. And he stopped and he looked at me, and he said to his daughter, he said something in Hindi, and then she said it back to him. She said, you know, the Swami Gali wanted me to tell you that when he looked at you, that when he looked at you, he saw a lion in your eyes, and he said that was very important, and it really stopped him, so that's why he told you. And also while we were there was a few things that I noticed that just came out of me, just like spiritual, you know, it just gushed out. When we walked in, I told my mother, I said, be very careful not to drop anything in here. She said, why? I said, because if you drop something, you'll have to bend over and you'll have to pick it up. And it looks like you're bowing to the idols, and there's idols everywhere. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know. I just felt like telling you that for some reason. And they invited us back again, and they were passing out food. And so my mom, I said, I don't think we should eat the food because we don't worship their gods, and it might be disrespectful. She said, okay. And after the entire reading was all done, this is the later instance, after the entire reading was all done, they took a garb off of one of the idols, and they gave it to my mother. And they told my mother, everyone in the house is allowed to touch this garb for the exception of your son. That's because they knew that I knew that it was Avodah Zarah, and that I was not allowed to handle it. Another piece of information he gave to me, and this was very scary, was he said, you are going to be in a car accident that is going to take your life, but God is going to spare you. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, well, how right could this idol worshiper be? And his daughter told me, she said, you know, he's only right 80% of the time. And I was like, okay, well, you know, when it comes to a car accident, it's going to kill me 80%. You know, that's a little too high of a percentage level. So by this time, I'm living in Detroit. I'm studying Judaism, and I met a gentleman by the name of Clark, who was from California, worked for the ACLU, and he lived in my building. Me and Clark, we got real tight real quick. And so Clark told me, he said, look, I'm going to California to visit my family for Thanksgiving. and I want you to have my car because I know you're always walking, taking the bus. I want you to have my car, take good care of it, and when you come back, I'll take it off your hands because I need it to drive to California. So I said, fantastic. So I had Kark's car. There we go. And I'm going back and forth handling business. One day, me and my friends are in the car. We're driving. I'm doing like 90. I'm supposed to be doing like 25. I turn a little too sharp. I run straight into a wall. The airbags didn't deploy. Nobody was wearing seatbelts. But by the grace of God, every single person in that car was well. Now, the day that this happened was on Thanksgiving, and first responding and like the sheriff's office, they're not really bothered with car accidents. When I crashed the car, there were people on the road when I crashed the car, but after I crashed the car, there was nobody there. And everybody that passed it, they said, "Is this your car? Is this your car? Are you okay? Are you bleeding?" I was like, "I'm fine, I'm fine." I was like, "No, we didn't get..." I was like, "No, I'm fine, everything's fine." So at the time, I walked to a friend's house. I was so depressed because somebody gave me something, and I was supposed to take care of it. And what my friend told me was, he said, "You know, you invited me to come with you, but I didn't want to come with you because I had a dream the night before that you killed me in a car crash. And I felt my body go through the windshield. I didn't tell you because this is obviously what God wanted for your life. And I'm just very glad that you're okay." Now, the story doesn't end there because it gets even better. Clark was going to sell the car for $7,000 upon his return to California. But because I crashed it under universal insurance, they gave him $12,000 cash, and he was able to buy a new car. There you go. So obviously there's something that was speaking to me, and I was trying my best to hear it. And after a while, I knew that it was my duty to leave everything else behind and to become a Jew. But how do I go about doing that? Because it wasn't until I started going to the synagogue in my neighborhood that I knew that there was a difference between being conservative and being orthodox and so on and so forth. And the community where I lived was very, very interesting because you have the synagogue, which is on one corner. Next to us is a speakeasy. Next to that was a coffee shop. And across the street from that was a house of ill repute. So the local joke was you could have a full weekend and then have enough time to come back for chakras and say taknu in the morning. So, right, so that's what they told us. So as I'm there, I'm noticing that there's a difference and a divide, and the divide was very ugly. I want to be a part of it because apparently we couldn't say Eshes Chayil because it was demeaning to women. We couldn't refer to God in the masculine because God is neither masculine nor feminine, and so if you refer to him in the male, you should refer to him in the female. So then when it was time for them to refer to him in the female, and they mentioned the mothers in the Amidah, they left off two. Zilpan Bilhan, I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Why are you leaving off these two women?" I said, "Didn't they give birth to Sadiqim?" They're like, "Yeah, but they weren't important." I was like, okay. Obviously, I need to go somewhere else. And luckily, Chabad just opened up a house right down the street. So I start going to the Chabad house in Detroit, which is ran by my rabbi, my beloved Rabbi Payne. And I'm talking about Payne. I said, so I'm noticing a difference. Something needs to be done, and I want to fix it. He says, "Okay, fantastic. Well, what I can do is I can put you in touch with the Vaad, and they'll take it from there." So I was in touch with them. I was going to all these different synagogues. I actually ended up going to a synagogue that I had passed all the time as a child. It was a very beautiful building, a little shtibel with this huge brown Mogen David on the front. And I said, I wonder what goes on in that building. And what imagined in my wildest dreams that I would be in there praying. And it was very nice. A bunch of old Ashkenazi guys. And in the wintertime, we wouldn't take the Sefer Torah out till about noon because then the sun would come out and it would melt the ice. So everybody could get to the synagogue safely. So there was a waiting period with me being involved with the Vaad. A lot of waiting. And I come from a family of people of action. If there's something that we want, we don't wait. We go ahead and we go for it. So I had a choice to make. I could stay in Michigan, I could wait, or I could jump on a plane and fly to Israel and do it myself. So what I decided to do was to fly to Israel and do it myself. I took out as many grants and scholarships as the state of Israel could throw at one person. I found the yeshiva to go to. They accepted me. But still there was a little issue of, just a little bit of the pocket change. A couple months before that, this lady who I used to fry falafel for gave me a phone call. She said, there's a rabbi in our community that had a flood. Because in Michigan, we have these horrible floods sometimes. He said he had a flood in his basement, and I want you to go and help him out. I'll pay you, don't take his money, and just give him some assistance. So I'm moving out all this stuff, and he says, Ariel, I was Ariel by this time. He said, Ariel, thank you so much for helping me out. I want to give you some gifts. So he gave me a shtender for the shul. He gave me a bottle of McClellan's. I obviously kept that for myself. And he also gave me this black garbage bag. He said, weird question. He said, I have a bag full of ram's horns. Anybody that wants them? I was like, I'll take them. I said, I can turn those into shofar, right? He's like, yeah. I said, great. Those ram horns sat in my apartment for about 6 months. So me and my buddy Freddie are brainstorming as how I can put some extra money into my pocket. I said, you know what? I got these ram horns. High holidays are right around the corner. Let's have a make your own shofar party. So he and I researched how to make shofars from start to finish. We laid them all out. We had a workspace. People would come by, buy a shofar. They'd make it. And that's how I got the extra money to go to Israel. So I jumped on the plane. And this is August 12th of, I think it's 2016. I touched down. I'm in Israel. And I went to my neighborhood, and I was so tired. I fell asleep. And I woke up, and they were singing the Psalms for Shabbat. I hurried up. I got dressed. I ran downstairs. And I davened, and at the end, I was looking like a lost puppy because I didn't speak the language. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew like the motion of how things were. And there was a gentleman that said, do you speak English? I said, yes. He was like, well, I've never seen you before. Where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Detroit. This guy, he said, oh, welcome. Come to my house for Shabbat. I'm like, fantastic. So slowly but surely, I became integrated into the community. A lot of folks knew who I was. I knew them. I developed a good rapport with my teachers and with my colleagues, with my friends. But for folks that can study for 12 hours and go to sleep and wake up and do the same thing, God bless them, because, not all of us are engineered that way. So at night, I would leave and I'll go on walks, because at the time when I came to Israel, I started reading the entire Torah from start to finish. And I came to the part where Avram Avinu, when he came to a new land, what did he do? He would walk it to see where it was. So I'm like, okay, I'm in a new land. I guess that means I should walk it. So I'm walking and walking and walking and walking. And I find the Kotel. So every single night for the Sefer Shabbat, I would leave the yeshiva and I would walk to the Kotel. Now apparently, there was an issue with a gentleman who would leave the yeshiva, especially at night. And this was something that was unbeknownst to me. And instead of people asking questions, they made a lot of assumptions. And along with those assumptions came I guess it's stronger than an assumption, the accusation. And so after a while, all these accusations piled up. And one day I was called. This is after about 6 months. And of course, the purpose I was there for is to convert. So I'm speaking to the people that are ahead of the conversion. They said, oh yeah, we'll take you to go see the Beit Din. When we come back from the Hanukkah Tiyul, everything is fine. Don't worry about it. It never happened. But not wanting to push my situation, I would just sit back and wait. So on one particular day, I was asked to come into the director of the English department. I was asked to come into his office. Has anybody here ever been fired before? Anybody ever been fired from a job before? Okay. When you come in the room, there's always that one guy who's standing in the corner, and then there's the other guy that's sitting at the table and has got his hands folded. So when I came in and I saw him with his hands folded, I was like, oh my Lord, what's getting ready to happen? Let me pause it right there. Before I left, I saw a very dear friend of mine who I'm not going to see again until I'm 60. And that's because, unfortunately, in our youth, we made a lot of horrible decisions. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I'll tell you what. The story of the Exodus is extremely important to me, because what we do is we put ourselves in these situations that we shouldn't be in, and God just has an infinite amount of mercy on us. And he says, you know what I'm going to do for you? I'm going to take you out of your situation. There were a lot of things I was involved in, that being my father's son and being a person of sound mind and body, that I shouldn't have been involved in. And one day I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I asked him, I said, how's your relationship with God? He looked at me square in my face and he said, non-existent, because God gets in the way of me doing my business. And he gets in the way of your business as well. It's a horrible thing to hear. horrible thing to hear. So as I'm leaving, I'm talking to my brother, and my brother, he gives me a hug, and he tells me, he says, you know, I'm stubborn, but your stubbornness makes me look like a Muslim housewife. He said, do me a favor and promise me, if anything happens to you in Israel, come home immediately. And I said, I'll try my best. So now we're going back to me coming into the office with the gentleman with the folded hands. So I sit down, and he says to me, he says, you know, it says in our tefillah that in order for you to be a part of good, you need to fully separate yourself from evil. And as far as I'm concerned, you are evil, and you have no place here. You have 3 days to clear your things out, and you can't come back. And I was like, well, you know, where is this coming from? What did I do? And he's like, well, you're a part of evil, and we just don't have any time for it. Not knowing what was done, I told them to give me a week. And they said, okay, we'll give you a week. Got all my stuff. And my friends, I was homeless, living in Israel. Moving from place to place constantly. Not sleeping well. Eating what I could. But thank God for the Jewish woman and her kindness. And I don't just mean one, I mean all of you. There were a lot of people that had mercy on my situation, and they would take me in. Friends who were at the end of their leases. I remember there was a young lady who was a friend of mine. She said, oh, if you know, I live in this big house by myself. If you do me a favor and paint my living room, you can shut yourself up in this room. You got your own kitchen and everything, and da-da-da. Just did it for all, but it was constantly moving. And at that time, I thought that I had failed. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. So I reverted to my old ways. Did a lot of things I shouldn't have done while I was in the land of Israel. I was in this holy place. I gave up on myself. And I was just sad. I was very depressed. And I spoke to a couple of Rabbanim, and they said to me, they said, oh, you know, well, because people would see me in the street who were from the yeshiva, and they're like, oh, Ariel, where have you been? I'm like, how do you not know where I've been? And tell you they kicked me out. They're like, no, what are you talking about? No. But anyway, they said, you know, don't worry about that. After Pesach, see if you can come back. So long story short, there was this huge game of yo-yo that was played with me and my time and my livelihood. And it wasn't until I was at the wedding of a very dear friend of mine that I was pulled aside by a Rav. And he said, you know what? We read your letters and we've spoken to people about you, and everyone has very high regards for you, but we just don't believe you. And to be totally honest with you, we should have never taken you in the first place. We had doubts about you from the day that we saw you. So God bless you and take care. And bless his heart, they had the nerve to give me a hug and to send me on my way. So the depression gets even worse. At this time, I'm living in Marchavia, and I just don't know what I'm doing. I said, God, I need you to do me a favor. I said, please, give me a sign that I am not wasting your time and my time. And about a day later, there was a knock on the door of the apartment I was staying in. There was a gentleman across the hallway that was moving into his unit. And he says, I'm moving in next door across the hall from you. God bless you. I'm moving in across the hall from you. I just wanted to know, did you know anybody that would want these items? Because I don't have any use for them anymore. The items were a brand new talit and a brand new pair of tefillin. Wow. God gave me my answer. Stay on the path. I couldn't use the tefillin yet, but the talit, that was fair game for at that point in time. I said, I'll take them. But of course I had to check to see if they were kosher. I didn't end up checking to see if they were kosher until I ended up coming here to New York. So while the entire time is going on, I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Because I still have the scholarship that's being used. And, you know, and by the way, my parents don't know anything about this, because there's certain things you don't want to let your parents know, because you don't want them to worry. Because, you know, as big and as strong as you may are, you're still that little baby. You know, you don't want to wig them out too much. So keeping all of this a secret, I functioned as well as I could. And I found out from the state, when I called them, I said, I need an extension on my scholarship. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. And they said, all right, fantastic. What's your name? I said, my last name is Payne, P-A-Y-N-E. They said, Mr. Payne, we have no record of you being in any yeshivot here in Israel. None whatsoever. I said, well, I've been at blank for the past 6 months. They never registered you. Well, I'm in the HaOr process. They've never heard of you. Well, the Beit Din, they don't even know you exist. Technically, you can't even be here right now. You're an illegal citizen. So you have to leave the state of Israel quickly before it becomes a legal issue. That made it even worse. So as I'm thinking and trying to formulate a plan together, a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, he comes to me and he says, so what's the deal? I said, well, I'm trying to find a new yeshiva, and I'm just trying to figure it all out. He says, well, I'm going to tell you what. He says, when it comes time for you to go back to Israel, I'll pay for your flight back. Or, excuse me, for time for you to go to the States, when you have to leave, I'll pay for your flight back. So don't worry about that. And another gentleman whom I know, we're actually not in contact with each other anymore, he said, oh, I heard about your predicament. I'll tell you what. You can move into my house and you find a new yeshiva and I'll pay for it. So here I am, living in the center of Jerusalem, marble floors, track lighting, nice stuff. And I'm going to another yeshiva. The yeshiva I went to at this point in time was a Haredi yeshiva in Har Nof called Devar Yerushalayim. Some of the sweetest people I've ever met. And I don't really like how the Haredim, they get a bad rap. A lot of people, they say that they're doing things the wrong way. But anyway, long story short, I was at this yeshiva that I went to for 6 months. They would tell me, oh, you're doing beautifully, you're doing great, da-da-da-da. And they dropped me like a bad habit. I was at Devar Yerushalayim for 1 month. And they said, anything you want from us, we'll give it to you. Just tell us. I said, please, I want you to make me a Jew. They said, well, there's politics involved, and we're Haredi, and the government doesn't have certain reference for us, so this is what we want you to do. We want you to keep studying, and we'll take care of it from our end. This one night, I was out house hopping on Shabbat, and I was at this rabbi's house, and he hosts close to 100 people, Jews and non-Jews alike. And I was the second last person to go in because I knew I was going to another meal. I didn't want to take up anybody else's seat. So there was somebody that came in from the neighborhood and they said, is there anyone here that can give us Shabbos help? I said, I can help you. And of course, all of us know Israelis are very nosy. Who are you? What's your name? What's going on? Why are you here? Da, 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 da. And at the end of my story, he said, oh, there's a rabbi that lives in my community who's done Gior all around the world. I can take you to go see him. Let's go see him. So he took me up to his house. The rabbi said, you want to speak in public or in private? I said, let's speak in private. Rabbi, here's my situation. He says, so where are you from? I said, I'm from Detroit. He said, why are you here? I said, I'm here to become a Jew. He said, where are you studying? I said, well, I'm going to be studying at Devar Yerushalayim in August. He waits for a minute. He's stroking his beard. He says, okay, this is what we're going to do. He says, I know the gentleman at Devar Yerushalayim very well. He said, when they say that you're ready, you have them write a letter. I'll sign that letter. You can go back to the States, go to any Beit Din with my signature, and you can come back and settle the land as a Jew. How about that? I said, fantastic. So I went, I studied. They noticed that I was excelling. They put the letter together, gave me all of my papers. The rabbi signed it. And now it was the time to find the Beit Din where I was going to go. And of course, where I want to go, I want to go to Michigan. I haven't seen my mother in a long time. Their Beit Din told me I'd have to start over. Another Beit Din I was sent to gave me no response. And then I thought, okay, wait a second. Where do all the Jews live in America? They live in New York. So I might as well just go there. So I came to New York because I knew the RCA is here. And where there's the RCA, there's clarity and there's order. So I came to New York, and I lived in Brooklyn for a while. I stayed by very few Sadiqim who allowed me into their home. And after a while, there was a feeling that set in of I was taking up space because I wasn't, I was just there and I was working. So I decided to leave and to go out, but it took a while for me to set in that I didn't have anywhere to go. So I had to swallow my pride, walk into a police department and say, hi, my name is Mr. Payne and I'm homeless and I need help. So they put me into the shelter system. At this time, I was working with a rabbi who is in Manhattan. But there was a ruling that was brought down by the people who were governing the conversion that you cannot work with a rabbi that you do not live in this community. So that rabbi was taken off of my case. After I met him, he vetted me very quickly and he said, you know what, do you have to fill in? I said, no. I said, yeah, but I don't wrap them. He said, well, you know what, we're going to get this done as quickly as possible because I do honestly believe that you're ready. So as all this is going on, as I'm staying in contact with him, I was then told that he couldn't help me. I was moved from Manhattan back to Brooklyn, then to the Bronx, then to Queens. And this is in February. I came back to the States about a full calendar year ago. And as I'm here, it's just very difficult. For those of us that don't know, and I really hope that nobody here, excuse me, I hope that nobody here ever has to go through homelessness ever, because it's a very harsh thing to go through. The shelter system is an extension of the prison system here in the United States. So what they do is they treat you as such. The place that I went was full of vice. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was very bad. And so for someone like myself, who's, you know, of his sound mind and body and just happens to be on his knuckles at the moment, they treat you like everybody else. You tell them you're kosher, they look at you like you got a thumb coming out of your forehead. And when they do give you kosher food, it looks like a takeout plate that's been just mashed up and it's cold and you have to eat it. Dry fruit and cereal, my friends, for about 2-3 months. That was that. People who are coming out of the prison system, they still function like they're in prison. So you walk around, you got these white strings hanging out, and you got guys that have crescents and stars tattooed on their face, and they say, "Are you a Jew?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Oh, we don't like Jews." "Okay, well, you know, I'm glad that you told me, so just make sure you stay away from it." Every day, every single day, there was always something about that Jew, that Jew, that Jew, that Jew. I was in a shelter in Brooklyn, and I was explaining Shabbat to one of the guards who actually let me leave and go and come as my religious schedule would have me do so. And there was a young man that overheard me, and he said, "You know, my name's David, and I'm Jewish. And I heard about you having tefillin. I haven't wrapped tefillin since my grandmother died." I said, "Well, you know, I haven't used mine, so you can wrap them." He said, "No, you know, I don't do that anymore." There was another gentleman who I met, and he was like, because I didn't have a lock on my locker, so what I would do is I would take my Israeli flag and put it over my locker. So, you know, if it was moved, I would know somebody was in and out of my thing, so people would see this. And in fact, he was a gentleman who's from Poland, and he told me, he's like, "You know, I'm Catholic, but my mother's Jewish," and he told me about his mother being, or his grandmother being in the Holocaust, and, you know, all these other things, really horrible stuff. So as I come to Queens, I'm here in Queens now, they put me in what's called a working shelter. You're rehabilitating people to go back into the workforce to live on their own. So me at this time, I'm working, and I'm living with a young Italian kid. His name is Anthony. And Anthony sees me one day come back from the kosher supermarket, and Anthony says to me, he says, "You know, this kosher food is pretty good." He's like, "You know, it's a lot better than the stuff that they serve here." And he's like, "Well, what's that stuff that you say before you eat the food?" I said, "It's a brachot, because what we're doing is we're elevating the fact that this food is not just for the nourishment of our bodies, but it's for Kiddushah." And he says to me, he says, "You know, you're from Israel, right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm from Israel." He says, "You know, I'd love to go there one day, because my mom's from there." And I said, "The woman who's raising you?" He said, "Nah, the woman who's raising me is Italian. The woman that gave birth to me, she's from Israel." I said, "Brother, you know what that means?" I said, "It means you're a Jew." He was like, "Well, how do I become a Jew?" Anthony's now covering his head and saying brachot over all of his food. Well, I was in another shelter in Brooklyn, and another gentleman come up to me, 6'4", missing teeth, tattoos on his face. He says, "You're from Israel, you a Jew?" I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "What is it like over there?" He said, "I heard that it's beautiful." So we're talking to him. I said, "What's your name, brother?" He says, "My name is Kalev Yosef." And he was like, "I know who all of these guys are, and you know, this Christianity thing is just really bugging me." I said, "Well, have you heard about the 7 mitzvahs?" And he's like, "What are those?" So now Kalev Yosef is a Noachide. So I just couldn't understand for the life of me, out of everything I had done, all the good I had done. I mean, when I was in that other yeshiva I told you guys about, there was a gentleman in the neighborhood that preyed upon children. We apprehended him and gave him over to the police department. There was a gentleman who almost died in my dorm room. I saved his life. There were folks who did far worse than what they accused me of, which they still haven't explained, and they don't have to. And I was easy to get rid of. And I was like, "God, why am I going through this hard time?" And when I meet these people, I understand that this is because this is where God wants you to be, because there's work. There's work that you have to do. So as I'm out there and I'm going through all these things, I'm getting phone calls and messages and emails from, you know, my running buddies, my comrades back at home, and they're like, you know, "Oh, you know, we're so proud of you. We want you to keep going. You know, we hope that everything's good with you. If you ever, you know, come back, please let us know." So as time's going on, I'm still at a stalemate, and I called a friend of mine who lived in Israel, and she told me about a friend of hers that lived not too far from here. And he's like, yeah, I got this friend Ariel, and he goes to this place called Bukhari and Sir, and he's got this rabbi, and he's amazing. So I ended up meeting Ariel, and Ariel ended up bringing me here, and I ended up meeting Rabbi Wagner, and I spoke with Rabbi Wagner, and I told him everything. He said, well, you know, I can't help you because I'm forbidden to take part in conversions, but what I can do is I can be your rabbi and your support system. So anything you need from me, please let me know. But still, I was in a stalemate. I was like, I want to come home. I want to be done. I want to come home. But it wasn't up to what I wanted. It was up to what God wanted for me. So as I'm waiting and working and studying, I met other members in the community, and I was over a friend's house, and he told me, you know what, I'm going to take you to this gentleman. I'm going to see if he can handle your case. His name is Rabbi Ben Chaim. Rabbi Ben Chaim is a pretty big deal. Zot Hashem will be able to help you and take care of you. Before I left Israel, I was with a friend of mine, and we're walking around the old city, and he says, I'm meeting up with my friend, Yonatan. Me and Yonatan start talking. Yonatan says, oh, where you going? I said, I'm going to New York. He's like, oh, you're going to New York to finish your conversion? You should call my uncle Ben Chaim. He should be able to take care of you. And I totally forgot that I had this man's phone number in my binder the entire time that I've been here. I totally forgot about it. Everything that was going on, I totally forgot about it. So as deciding what to do about my case, it seemed to some people a little odd that a gentleman who wants to be a Jew, who was living in Israel, didn't finish his conversion, hopped around yeshivot, has a certain living predicament. So they said, you know what? We'll come back to it. We'll see. So as I'm like, okay, you know, I just came that much closer to it, and it got pulled away from me again. What else am I supposed to do? I just kept working and kept studying. My tefillin that I had that I couldn't use still had to be checked. I met a gentleman here who is, I believe that he's the chazan for the youth minyan. He's a sofer. I gave him my tefillin, had him check it for me. He calls me back. He says, you know what? I'm almost done checking it, but I just had to call you and let you know that this is the most beautiful pair of tefillin I've ever seen in my life. Where did you get this from? I was like, guys, there's a whole story behind it. This guy got rid of it. He didn't want it. And, you know, now I have it. He's like, all right, well, make sure you take care of it when I give it back to you. So I get it bound up. I get it given back to me. And I eventually get a phone call. And this phone call was from a friend of mine that invited me to his house for Shabbat. So we're sitting there, we're talking, we're eating. He was like, yeah, you know, while I was here, earlier this week, there was a rabbi from Israel that was here. His name is Rabbi Harry Rosenberg. I said, wait a second, is he short, red beard? He's like, yeah, how do you know him? I'm like, that's my rabbi from Israel. Do you still have his number? He's like, yeah, he gave me his number. Rabbi Rosenberg took me to Rabbi Ben Chaim's Beit Din. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have you take your test. We're going to come back, and everything's going to be fine. I came back. To take my test. I was very, very, very nervous. So I went to Rabbi Wagner and I said, what should I do? He said, well, you know what? The laboratory yort side is coming up. I want you to go to the kever. I just want you to just pour your heart out. I said, okay, because I've been doing that before. I actually did that 2 years ago. All of us in Detroit, the Chabad House of Detroit, we all took a repurposed school bus from 1996, ripped some seats out in the back, made some beds, and we took a road trip. We ran into a little bit of a problem. The engine started smoking. We pulled into a gas station, and we were trying to fix the bus. A gentleman came from across the gas station. He said, I noticed you all are having trouble. I'm a bus mechanic. How can I help you? And so he fixed our bus. We drove to the kever, and that was 2 years ago, and I hadn't seen my rabbi since. I thought I was supposed to go at night. I missed my opportunity, so I decided to go in the daytime. So I went in the daytime. I walked in the exit, and who did I see? I saw my rabbi's son who I haven't seen in 2 years. He says, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? I'm like, I'm very well. Please take me straight to your father. I went to his father, hugged him up, got some brachot, stood in line, waited for about 2.5 hours, got to where I was supposed to be, poured my heart out to the Almighty, and I said, okay, whatever you want me to do, I've done it. I hope that I've done it thus far, and I just really, really, really would appreciate your help. I'm like, talk to somebody up there. Let somebody hear me, please. Because I'm tired. I'm just so tired. And it was heard. It was heard. Shortly after I was told to come in, I took all of my tests and they said, you know what, we think that you're ready. But there's a little bit of an issue. And that issue is we noticed that you have a lot of tattoos on your body. Now, we don't have, what you used to do it, but you don't do it anymore. Fantastic. but we don't want anyone to have any preconceived notions about you. So we'd like for you to get them removed. And I said, well, gentlemen, this is going to be very expensive. This is going to take a very long time, but I'll do it. They left me by myself in a room. They came back 10 minutes later, and the rabbi had a smile on his face. He said, you know what? When you take a step towards God, he takes 2 steps towards you. You bring us the bill. We'll take care of it for you. For those of us that don't have tattoos, please keep that. Do not put tattoos on your body. Because if you have to make tshuva, the first thing you do is you need to do tshuva. But I had to get them removed. And it is by far the most painful thing I have ever experienced in my life. I mean, I was sweating the whole time, but I knew that all this pain was for something greater. And when I came out, I was all done. I mean, I had to go in 3 different sessions within the course of 3 months. And I called them. I said, okay, I'm all done. When I go to the mikveh? And they said, you'll go to the mikveh. You'll go shortly. You'll go soon. You'll go soon. And I was like, come on, please, let's get this done. I was like, this is Parsha Lech Lecha. This is Avram. I was like, I'm a convert. He's a convert. Let's go. They're like, okay, just wait. And they wanted me to wait for a reason. I'm not sure why, but it worked out wonderfully, and I'll tell you why. In the organization that I was a part of, they used to call me MLK after Dr. King, because I was very militant and I am very militant and also very prayerful in my actions. The day I went to the mikveh was Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. So not only did I go to the mikveh, but the Almighty, when they say that God knows your heart, he knows it. And God knows that I love a party. There were a couple that were there, a man and a woman who converted together, and they got married the exact same day. And I got to hold up a corner of their chuppah. It was wonderful. So all of us were together. We were celebrating. We were very happy. And I remember before I went into the mikvah, I called my parents. I said, I just wanted to let you guys know that, I've been accepted, and that they're going to throw me in the mikvah, and I'm going to be a member of HaOr. And they're like, son, we're so proud of you. And we're so glad that you stuck to your guns and your goals, and that you got this done for yourself. And I couldn't be prouder. My father said, I couldn't be prouder of you. And that coming from my dad was massive, because you got to think about it. Like I told you guys before, my father is the great-great-great-grandson of a man who was a slave in the town that he was from. And what lifts it up even higher, which is, I always admire my father, because with all the things that my father's done from the small town that he's from, his town honored him with a day of remembrance, not just in one city, but 2. And he has a monument in his town that bears his name and his accomplishments. And with me being a student of history, studying, Hannibal crossing the Alps and Alexander and Julius Caesar, I'm like, what is going to be my legacy? What is going to be my mark? I'm like, my father's he's already immortal, quote unquote. So what's going to be my legacy? And I do believe that my legacy now is going to be when someone has the last name of Payne, it is now elevated into a Jewish last name, and they know that they have a place, which is the land of Israel. They have a nation, which is the Jewish nation. And they have a God that is loving and kind, and regardless as to what they go through, is never, ever going to forsake them. So with that being said, I do thank you all so much for listening to the, believe it or not, abridged version of my journey to Judaism. And I just want to close on two points. Number one, it is extremely important that, be it that we are sons of the King, that we conduct ourselves as such. And daughters of the King, that we conduct ourselves as such. It is important that we men, that we guard our brit. It is very important. It's very important. It's so important that you do that. Is that God has endowed us to be creators by us having that function. So you should guard it. You should keep it. And also for those of you that may have your tzitzit, but you tuck them in your pants, you're not ashamed to be a prince. Pull your tzitzit out. If you don't have your head covered, a prince would not be ashamed to wear his father's crown. Cover your head with your crown. Always keep your crown covered. And also, we do think that modesty is important for women, but it's also important for men as well. Gentlemen, please be modest in your actions. Be sweet and kind and loving to every single person that you meet. When you see your brother walking on the street, speak to him. Make sure he's doing well. Honor your mothers and your sisters in the Torah and your heritage, and I can guarantee you all will be well. Even for those of us that don't or may not believe in God, even if you don't believe in God, He believes in you 100,000%. So God bless you all. Thank you all so much for listening. And that's the connection.